I'm Deborah Davidson. If you don't know me, I'm the founder and director of Catalyst Conversations. I'm really happy to be here at the list for our 17th public event, a big conversation about STEAM, which stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Math. And it's been organized in collaboration with the Cambridge Creativity Commons and the Agenda for Children. So I'd like to thank the list again, and especially Courtney Clemens, who has worked with us in creating this event here, and Director Paul Ha. I'd also like to thank the Cambridge Arts Council, our founding partner and fiscal agent and funder, as well as the Catalyst Conversation Advisory Board for their advice and connections and feedback. There's a commonality in the discovery process and creative drive in both art and science, and that came up a lot in the discussion earlier of really a parity, or the desire for parity between art and science. Not that the arts are serving science, but that there's a real synergy between the two, and I think that's a really great goal. And partly that's what this conversation is about. And we're going to today continue this discourse. As I said, we addressed it some in the earlier part, and we'd like to continue that in this 6 to 7 portion. All the programs that we create express the idea that both art and science seek to comprehend our world and ourselves. Catalyst Conversations normally presents artists whose work resonates with science, really kind of a one-on-one. And this afternoon and evening, we are expanding that definition of what we do by inviting these two groups of really terrific thinkers, practitioners, and earlier we had a few students thinking about engaging the arts with science. So again, our group now will present very briefly as an introduction to themselves, and then they'll have an opportunity to have a conversation with each other, and then towards the end a Q&A with you. Again, I won't have time to read all the bios, which are all long and illustrious, but you will find the bios on the back of the program we created, and we made a STEAM page which will stay on our website with lots of links and ideas and resources and the bios. This evening we'll first have greetings from the City of Cambridge Vice Mayor Dennis Benzin, then Martha McKenna, first person to my right, University Professor and Director of the Creativity Commons at Lesley University, will say a few more remarks to begin, and then she will act as our moderator. And let's see if we're in order here. So to her right is Gavin Andrews, who's the Assistant Director for Family, Student, and Teacher Programs from the Peabody Essex Museum. Diane Daly, who's the Education Programs Manager from the Mass Cultural Council. Scott Osterweil, who's the Creative Director of the Education Archive, Research Director at the Comparative Media Studies here at MIT. We have Saeed Arida, who's the Founder and Chief Excitement Officer. That is just an amazing title at Nuvu, and he will explain to us what both those things are. And at the end of the table is Leela Kinney, who's the Executive Director of Arts Initiatives at MIT Center for Art, Science, and Technology, also known as CAST. So without further ado, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Deborah. Good evening, everyone. So I wanted to thank the Cambridge Arts Council, Jason, for all the work that you do around STEAM. I want to also thank the Cambridge Community Foundation, Bob, and Creativity Commons, Kyle and Martha, as well as the Cambridge Agenda for Children, Khari Milner and Susan Richards, who I've known from pretty much most of my life. And this work is incredibly important, and so I want to really thank all of you for being here today, because this work would not be happening without you and without your effort. And so I want you to know that I certainly appreciate it, and those on the council and others in our city administration appreciate the work that you're doing. I grew up just right behind here, about 2 blocks from Newtown Court in Washington Elms, which is surrounded by many of the most prosperous companies in the world, like Novartis and Google. And as a young kid, I would ride my bike with my friends over by Draper Labs. And back in the mid-'80s, much of what we consider Kendall Square today was not there, except for Draper Labs and a couple of other companies. And when you think about this work, I want you to kind of think about this image a little bit, and that is, we would pull up to the window at Draper Labs, and we would peer through the window. And we would always ask ourselves as kids, what are they making in there? And we had heard that they made, bombs, and that they made nuclear weapons. And as you know, during the 80s, we were going through the Cold War. And sometimes in our conversation, we would say to each other that we were going to get bombed by the Russians. And we would quickly say that, no, we're not going to get bombed because we have Draper Labs and we have bombs too. And, our connection with, at the time, which we consider, STEM education or science, was really just peering through the window. And nowadays, we have a very strong innovation economy in our city. And just this past weekend, I was part of a panel where we discussed incarceration, and we discussed a school-to-prison pipeline. And this work is important because, this is our school-to-innovation economy pipeline. And this is the work that's going to alleviate many of the problems that we have in our community. And all the kids that are growing up in Newtown Court and Washington Elms and Wrench Towers and Roosevelt Towers, everywhere in our city, regardless of your ethnicity or your race or religion, many of our kids and our adults do not have access to this economy. And the only way that they're going to have access is through the work that you're doing and through the work that we do on the council and that we do in our schools. And, this work is too important at a time when we're losing a lot of families in our city, housing prices are going up. Much of the workforce in our city is made up of folks that come into our city to work. I mean, if you stand by the platform in Kendall Square on any given morning, a lot of the folks that are getting off these trains are not folks that live in our city, but they're getting off the train, coming into work, and then they're leaving our city. And so we've got to do a better job of connecting our neighborhoods with the innovation economy. And, and this is work that's even more important because, as recently the Supreme Court ruled on an affirmative action program at the University of Michigan, which means that families that are struggling and throughout this country are going to have less and less access to education. And it's becoming increasingly harder for them to have access to education, which means that we need to create programs in our city that give our kids a chance and an opportunity. And one of those places that I've been pushing for is the creation of a STEAM center at the Foundry Building. And many of you are familiar with this initiative. And, I'm of the opinion that we don't need one STEAM center, we need several STEAM centers around our city that give access to our residents, and not so much just the high-tech community that already has access, but really our residents. So, I want to just really thank you for all your work, and don't stop. And whatever we can do on the council to be supportive of your work, we will do that. And in the end, we will create more and more opportunities for our residents. So thank you so much.
Good afternoon. I'm Martha McKenna, and I direct a Center for Creativity at Lesley University. And the center was created in order to spark innovation in teaching and learning across the disciplines. So I took as my model for creating that center the Art Science Lab of David Edwards at Harvard. And I'm sure if he weren't in Paris, he'd be part of our table today because we've got some of the best minds to talk with you this afternoon. But he talks about the importance of this arts-science collaboration. He said, in the best collaborations, the distinction between art and science disappears, and the creator is free to develop an idea without having to label it in one way or another. As Edwards noted, ultimately, you're exposing the really rich intellectual space between the arts and the scientists. One of the things that we've seen is that in the heart of the process of these experiments, it's hard to know who is the artist and who is the scientist. This is a mutually creative, analytical, and aesthetic process. And as we started to introduce ourselves at the table, we discovered how we were all artists and innovators and scientists and educators, which you'll hear a little bit about. What better place to have this conversation than Cambridge, where some of the greatest minds in science are here at our universities, MIT, of course, Harvard, a little bit at Lesley in science education, but also the labs, the industry. It's a center for science. What better place for the arts? All of you who saw Time magazine this week saw that Diana Paulus is considered one of the 100 most outstanding people in the world for the work that she's doing at the ART. So our visual and performing arts in Cambridge are quite extraordinary. We heard earlier from Khari that STEAM is a team. And that notion of collaboration, of bringing the artists and the scientists together is critical. We talk about catalyst, which is a spark. We talk about steam, which comes from bubbling. What you're going to hear this afternoon from this wonderful group of people is what happens when we bring the artists and the scientists together. Something magical, something terrific. And now, without further ado, we're going to hear from our panel and the work they're doing. Gavin?
Hi there, I'm Gavin Andrews from the Peabody Essex Museum. How many of you have been way far north to Salem, Mass, to Peabody Essex Museum? Great, excellent. I'm so thrilled to hear that. Some of you may know that the museum is actually the oldest continuously operating museum in the United States. We were founded in 1799 by sea captains sailing from Salem to Indonesia, to Japan, to China, and part of their goal was not just to trade and develop commerce, but to bring the world back to Salem. And they were so interested in this exchange of ideas, and even today, that's a big part of who we are and what we want to do. And a lot of that you can see through our exhibitions and through the education programming that we offer. This is just an aerial shot of the museum to give you a sense of scale, and these are our wonderful community members lining up on an event day. And in terms of working with community, we have a wide range of programs that throughout the course of this discussion I hope to be able to mention. But for us, the big ideas are what matter. And encouraging young people in particular, we focus a lot on K through 12 and increasingly with university students, both in in-school and out-of-school programs, and engaging them in creative and critical thinking, whether it's looking critically and discussing their perspectives on what they see in the gallery, or teaching them new skills in the form of art making so that they can express themselves creatively, whether it's an art idea or a technical idea or a science idea. We have two primary locations where I could easily call out, and I think any of you could call out and say, yep, this is STEAM. They're doing STEAM here. And one of them is our Art and Nature Center, which is an interdisciplinary education space where we host on a rotating basis contemporary art exhibitions that examine the intersections between art, science, and natural history. Right now we have a show that's looking at the question whether humans are the only creatures that make art. Do animals make art as well? So come and join us at PEM and you can unpack that idea with us. And the other space, which is hot off the presses, it's been open for about 6 weeks, is our new Maker Lounge. And the Maker Lounge was really developed rather quickly out of this increasing itch that we wanted to scratch, which is about what is this intersection of art, science, technology, engineering, and math, and how can we examine these creative disciplines, these creative design elements that cover each of these disciplines in the pursuit of creative expression. Somebody mentioned earlier circuit stickers. This is circuit stickers that we worked with someone from the MIT Media Lab who actually has been manufacturing these. This image on the right. So we're doing a wide range of programming, both with artists and scientists that are coming into our space to develop programming on a drop-in basis, and also with after-school programs and with schools, but also self-guided or unfacilitated programming in the form of design challenges. Right now our design challenges are focused on architecture, computational thinking, and industrial prototyping. So there's a interest for us to think about what are the low-tech and high-tech types of materials and resources that we can combine in the pursuit of creative expression. And pass it on to Diane.
So it's great to be here. I'm Diane Daly. I'm the Education Programs Manager at the Massachusetts Cultural Council. How many of you know what the Massachusetts Cultural Council is? Oh, excellent. And so for those of you that don't, it's your state agency that is responsible for promoting the arts and the sciences, and here it comes, and the humanities. Who had the humanities question? And the humanities in the Commonwealth. And we do that using your tax dollars through the state, as well as money that comes to us from the National Endowment for the Arts. And the reason that we exist is because there is a definite commitment to the idea that the arts and the sciences and the humanities are who we are. And on that basis, they are the drivers of healthy economies, healthy communities, and creative minds. And so we see that as our entire mission, is to, in every place in the Commonwealth, support work and thinking and learning and creativity and products and connection around these three areas. We do that by supporting 400 organizations in the arts, science, and the humanities, 750 and more schools. Each community in the Commonwealth has got a local cultural council. We're the only state in the country that's got that, just like we're the only state in the country that has an agency that's supporting the arts and the sciences and the humanities. Most of them are arts, all the rest of them are arts councils. So the local cultural councils take money from the MCC and re-grant it in a way that supports the work that's going on in the communities and the learning and how that community wants to see it. Individual artists we support, and we support economic development in the communities around the state. So from our perspective, art is central. So to say STEAM, what not STEAM or STEAM or whatever you want to call it, it's really not the question. The question is, how do we use all of the resources available to us as human beings to achieve our goals? And so on that basis, it's a both and an all of the above, in a way that makes sense in each of those individual situations that are challenged or opportunities or whatever we are wanting to create. I just am throwing this up because I want to let you know that there's a STEAM caucus down at the at our what do we call it? Our Congress down in Washington, D.C. So this conversation is going on, as you know, all over the country. And why the arts? You've seen all of these charts. It's because the arts, and I'm going to say, and the sciences and the humanities are all about creative minds. So it's envisioning, you know all of these things. I don't need to add it. So thank you for the opportunity to be here for this conversation today. I want to say that Martha wanted me to say this, we as an agency that promotes all of these opportunities decided that we needed to start a statewide conversation so that we could understand what was going on in the various communities. And we had a conversation about a year ago and brought people into the room and say, what's happening and why is it happening and where can we as a state agency be helpful in this? And I want to say that this conversation that's going on here in this community is stellar. And it's where it's happening. It's where we're going to make the movement that we need to make. So thank you.
I didn't bring slides, so I'm not going to get up. Is the mic on? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, great. So I'm Scott Osterweil. I design games. I've been designing games for about 20 years. Most of them have been around what are, I guess, STEM topics, math and science, but my own background was in theater. So to me, the convergence of art and math and science has always been interesting and always worth exploring. And just so that, I'll be brief just to get us to the conversation quicker. But from my perspective, because I know when I mention games, you probably all have very different images in your minds of what games are about and what games for learning are about. So to simplify things, let me just say that I think of games as being for one thing only, which is sort of games are for play, but my goal through that play is for fostering lifelong curiosity, lifelong learning, and lifelong invention. And it doesn't matter in what domain those things happen. And I assume that they happen, as the original quote mentioned, that they happen in the space between art and science. So I'll pass the mic with that.
Thank you, Scott.
It's my turn, right?
Yep.
So I'm Saeed. I come from this place called Nouveau. I'm gonna tell you give you a quick introduction to it. The main focus for us is to teach students how to go through a messy process like this one. Everybody knows probably how, if you are in the creative field, you probably banged your head against the wall many times and you go through this maze, but ultimately you get to something. And I spent around 6 years of my PhD life here in the architecture school trying to prove to people hypothetically that you can actually teach this to people. And then I started at school after that. So the whole pedagogy that we have at Nouveau is based on the architecture studio model. Is this you have this intense kind of iterative process in which you produce something not knowing even anything. They tell you to design a toy or a house or something without giving you any notions of what that thing is, and you make it, and then you go through intense critique process basically, and within 3-4 months you finally get to something that actually looks pretty cool. So for us, this is kind of teaching students how to go through a creative process like this. And critique is really the main focus for us, is how to kind of teach teachers and students how to engage in this kind of critique process that is very productive and constructive. So the idea is that students receive that feedback and synthesize it into basically the second iteration, and they make a lot of design decisions along the way. And so the idea, if you go back to the previous slide, is that at every stage we want them to keep track of this, of all these design decisions. This is the space that we have. I think it's unexpected a little bit because it's in Central Square. It's if you know Moxa and Veggie Galaxy, it's exactly on top of that. It's a pretty cool space, and when we moved in there, we since I'm an architect, that's the only useful thing I got from being an architect. I wanted to make sure that the space was actually pretty cool. So it's an open space where everybody is working on many different things at the same time, and probably the space can tell you there's the robots, there's the art stuff and the music and the 3D printing and the shop, and everything is happening at the same time. Since I said space on the studio model, our studios run only for 2 weeks, so the students, we have around 35 students in it's what I usually tend to call Nouveau a boutique school. We are actually not set up as a school, we are set up as a private company, which means we can experiment with all the kids and nobody is gonna sue us, which is a good thing. Every 2 weeks, basically, the students are given a problem and they have to solve it at the end of 2 weeks. So as you can see, all the projects that I'm going to show here, they start with a sketch on the top left and they end up with a pretty kind of refined thing. This studio, all of our studios are usually taught by 2 people from very different backgrounds. So this one was taught by a medical doctor and a roboticist, and the student came up with this idea of an advanced cane that for his granddad. That is pretty cool, 3D printed and electronics and sensors and all of that. This is another one. We have a partnership with the Boston Fashion Week, so every kind of November we have 5 dresses of the students' work, and we have actual models on the runway. And these are also, we like fashion in this way because there's a lot of robotics in it, a lot of laser cutting and 3D modeling and all of that. So it combines really all of the stuff that we are talking about here. This is one of the more incredible things that we've been doing recently, which is the DIY prosthetics. And students basically are using the tools that and the processes that we are teaching them and producing stuff for other kids. So we were working with this kid, Leon, who's amputated, he does not have fingers. So they designed this artistic hand for it. So you can see how it kind of has a ratchet. So as you kind of rotate the ratchet, you can use different tools on it, and he's kind of using it to draw his name at the bottom. So for us to take kids from that inspirational image that you see the left, go through all the iterations, and you get to something that is as connected to how they feel about the world as possible. This is kind of what we want to do. Thank you.
Thank you. To do a quick switch here. Thank you. I'm Leela. I want to say a few words about the arts at MIT, what we do here. First of all, the kind of STEAM curriculum that we have at MIT. Second, our Center for Art, Science, and Technology, which tries to make sure that these things are embedded throughout the research and education of the Institute. Third, how we use visiting artists in this context. And then I want to invite you to a symposium next September 26th to 27th, and to a Hacking Arts event on October 3rd for a weekend, which programmatically puts artists, engineers, and entrepreneurs together. It's run by students in the Sloan School. So that's the overview in case I don't get through it in 2 minutes. I just wanted to say briefly that there's a strong legacy of this tradition of combining sciences and arts at MIT. Our motto is actually mens et manus, mind and hand. A lot of people forget this, but in the original seal, it said sciences and arts. It was always intended to be a combination, not just the useful arts, but the fine arts and architecture. We have the oldest program in the country. What's so interesting about MIT students today, and this is why I think the STEAM initiative is so important, is that we are seeing increasingly students come who have a combination of technical skills and this not only practice, experience in the arts, but drive for creativity. Since I've been in this position, I've been tracking students, incoming students. There's a phenomenal level of interest in the arts among freshmen. The enrollments in art subjects are over half of all undergraduates take one voluntarily each year. And we now actually have a requirement in our general institute requirements in our core curriculum that all students take an arts class. You can see here, the reason these don't add up to 100% is that you can be active in more than one arts field as undergraduates. No surprise, music is the strongest. It's cliche, but it's true. You're good in music, you're good in math. This is sort of steady state for about 5 years now. It's actually, these are kind of extraordinary statistics because these kids are also, off the charts in science and math. Here's our core curriculum. It's been this way for quite some time. It's incredibly balanced. So we take all these science, this is the 17 required courses before you declare your major or by the time you graduate. Very balanced between humanities, arts, and social sciences and the sciences and math. A lot of it goes back to this guy, 13th president of MIT. Can't tell you about him, but it's kind of embedded in our culture. So the Center for Art, Science, and Technology is a Mellon-funded initiative that is designed to be the sort of latest iteration of this. It's really to continue this tradition of hands-on learning and to make sure that there are cross-disciplinary courses throughout the Institute. Everything from learning how to exhibit and display science, which often is taught by the director of the MIT Museum, John Durant. These are courses that CAS supports, or this wonderful course, Design Across Scales, by an architect and designer in the Media Lab, which programmatically puts students from all across the Institute together. This is a visualization of climate change. You'll see how long it takes Boston to disappear. You'll be happy to know. But anyway, this is a class that puts teams of students together to do various projects. The first one is data visualization. The second one is make something that makes something and then make something with it. And the third is a game. Doesn't necessarily have to be a virtual game. We also
sponsor classes in, for example, in the Center for Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab about various sort of folding mechanisms. You may have heard of the work of Eric Demain, who is an expert in computational origami and is one of these people, as Scott says. You can't tell where the art begins and the science begins. They're entirely merged together in his work. Finally, Deborah wanted me to say a few words about how we embed visiting artists into our research and teaching. This is just a tiny excerpt of a larger visiting artist video about the work of artists in our labs. This is by the artist, probably the best-known Brazilian artist, Vic Muniz, who's based in Brooklyn, but also back and forth. He came to MIT and did two things. One is he worked with the synthetic biology lab to make portraits out of bacteria, and the other is that he decided to etch a drawing of a sandcastle on a grain of sand. So let me show you just a little excerpt of this.
A lot of my work is trying to figure out interesting ways to combine materials with computers. And through the research, I found out about Vic's work. And I sent Vic an email. Immediately, he responded. He's like, yes, I want to come by. I've heard about MIT and the Media Lab for a long time.
This is a highly abstracted image because what's going on is that system there is throwing charged particles of gallium at the surface. Vic has this vision of etching castles into grains of sand.
And he asked me, like, can we do this at MIT? Is there a way that we can make an image that's so small that we can actually put it onto a grain? We've been going through all these different kinds of equipment, creating really cool techniques.
So you get an idea of this. And then finally, as I said, I just want to invite you to come to this symposium in September, 2 days, where we're putting artists, scientists, and cognitive scientists in particular, and humanists and scholars together to talk about these various overlaps based on 3 themes: seeing, sounding, and sensing. Thank you.
You can imagine how difficult it is to have these people who are doing such important work and asking them to speak quickly. So we're going to engage in a dialogue for the next few minutes, and I'm going to start by asking the question, what does STEAM mean to you and your organization? Anyone? What does STEAM mean to you and your organization? Saeed?
Probably we never think about it. I think it's that we just do it. For us, what's been interesting is that, usually if you go to high schools and, we do a lot of technology with at Nuvu. So if we brand it as robotics, then probably, or technology, then we're gonna only get the nerdy boys. But I think what's been interesting at Nuvu is that, when everybody enters through a creativity lens, so it does not really matter, like the idea is that you are coming up with an idea and then you have to execute the idea at the end. And in the middle, like this whole kind of maze, you would need a lot of tools basically to execute. Sometimes you need to express an idea in some way and sketch it, and another way you need to run a science experiment to do something, and some other way you need to 3D print and stuff and to get to the end. So I think it's embedded that we are using all of these, but we kind of never talk about it.
It's holistic for you.
Exactly, yeah.
Anyone? Gavin?
It's definitely similar for us, and I have to admit, over the past several years, as STEAM has really become a thing, we're sort of looking at ourselves at the Peabody Essex Museum saying, well, yeah, we've been doing this for a long time. We've been thinking and making and playing and experimenting across these disciplines in a holistic, and I think somebody used that word earlier today, and natural way that feels very authentic. And it's just that now we start to have kind of like a hashtag for it. If you do hashtag STEAM on Twitter, it's kind of crazy all the things that you see that come up and what people are talking about. And as we develop a shared language for what this means, I think it is community driven in terms of what the needs are for the community and understanding how we think in this way and explore and experience. But there are multiple meanings to what STEAM means. And I don't want to change the topic, but I think one thing that I question about the idea of STEAM is that STEM came first as an acronym, and by placing the A, in some ways it does place arts in service of STEM, and so how can we change the meaning a little bit? And that's, as an artist, as an arts educator, that's always going to be my lens. I don't think that always actually plays out. I think the arts are very supported and vibrant, especially by all the folks in this room, but it's just, something to think about what the terminology is and what we mean.
I mean, the thing that I'd love to challenge in the terminology, if you think about it, the derivation of talking about STEM was connected with kids and education and their careers and the future and a very utilitarian view of education. And I would really argue that that it's a fool's errand asking kids to sort of pick career, to look at their education as planning for a career, because as I tell them, I'm a game designer, that career didn't exist when I graduated college. And so if we refine what we're talking about, we're not talking about sort of education for your future career, but rather education for how to live your life, then the room for STEAM sort of becomes natural. And then at that point, I don't know whether you even call it STEAM anymore, but.
Yeah, I was going to say that there are many places in communities where it's just happening because that's the way people do their work. That's the way a museum does its work. That's at Berkshire Museum out in Pittsfield, Art and Science, Peabody Essex Museum. There are the various industries around that are doing, but I think we sort of get the STEAM thing because we're trying to look at what the feeders are to that. Where are we going to get these new creative thinkers? We have some, but we're desperate for them. So that's why it's important to the Massachusetts Cultural Council, because we have a future that we need to be preparing for and giving our children the opportunity to succeed in, and in whatever place that it happens in their life. I have a personal commitment to it because I think it is about creativity, and I think that we miss that in our education system at the moment, except for it does happen in many places, but they're classroom by classroom by classroom or individual schools. So it's about taking those opportunities, those places, and extending it throughout the community, throughout the schools, in whatever form schools tend to look like in the next coming years.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Thank you. Yes, I want to agree that we just do it. But I guess what I want to stress, I agree with the problems with the acronym, and it tends to put these in these separate categories. What interests me is the combination in the individual students and getting people to sort of learn. That's what's most interesting, or the combination through partnerships and teams of putting different kinds of people with different approaches and backgrounds together. I think that is one of the most exciting things to see what emerges in contexts like that. So programmed cross-disciplinary teaching and research, but also getting people to discover those different strands in themselves. So I'm not the artist and you're not the this, whatever. It's the combination that's interesting.
At the Creativity Commons, we talk about creative processes pedagogy, and I think we've heard that among all of you as well. And we define that as first imagining what an artist would do. You have to imagine what's possible that doesn't exist. You then have to go through a process of creating, a process of critiquing, where you look back and reflect and make it stronger, and then exhibiting, sharing it with others. And I think that notion of creative process, I've heard from all of you as well. You just mentioned partnership, and I think that's really important. What have been some of the creative partnerships that you've experienced in your organizations that have moved forward this STEAM initiative, or science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics? Anyone want to? Okay.
Well, I was thinking about this in terms of sort of what's happening around the state. So, of course, you have your wonderful creativity expanded learning STEAM network here in Cambridge, and you also have this Catalyst conversation. There's a lot going on there. We have a place like the Orchard Garden School in downtown Boston. We've got the Art of Science Learning out in Worcester, which is one of 3 places in the country that National Science Foundation is funding. It's an incubator around the confluence of art and science around specific issues. They've taken technology, transportation as their issue. We've got a theater and a environmental center working together in Holyoke and Amherst to sort of bring science to students in those schools that are in a way that is accessible, whether your access is through the science particularly, or your access may be more through the art in a way that's about learning. So there's Swiss necks here too. So, there's a lot of places.
We've just started kind of an informal relationship with our local university in Salem, Salem State University, and I've been working closely with a biology professor who is interested in STEAM, but from her angle. And so we've been doing a lot of research and testing out together, and one of the things that we've been able to pull off that I'm really excited about that helps define our partnership is that in the fall, she'll be on sabbatical from Salem State, and she'll actually be a scientist in residence at the museum. And part of what she'll be doing is working with our natural history collection, doing some research, but also working with our educators to examine what are the scientific concepts that we could explore more deeply through exploration in our galleries. And so by bringing on someone who has such specific expertise in an area that we clearly don't, we hope to really strengthen what we can offer in our galleries and also in support of what educators want to bring into their classrooms that is integrated across art and science.
Great. Saeed?
We actually kind of created an environment for us that would allow us to do this by default. So we are 5 full-time people who are both designers and roboticists, but we have like 3 people rotating every 2 weeks. So if you want to do something about medical devices, we make sure to get a medical doctor to help us. If we are doing a video game, we get a video game designer. So we are always kind of connected. But on a larger scale, for instance, we did a collaboration with the Arboretum and the Meta Lab at Harvard. We designed these robots that live in the park that measure certain things about the environment and reports like online somewhere. So the Boston Fashion Week has been like really incredible too. So we do a lot of these things.
When we do a collaboration, in any game we do it in collaboration with people who know a subject area. So I always start, if I'm doing it's like I did a game with the Smithsonian and I met with a bunch of their scientists. I start by asking each of them, where's the game in your work? And they usually give me a blank stare. And then I say, well, what do you think about when you're out when you're taking a shower or you're out for a run? And gradually we start to find out where they actually play. And in fact, where they play is where they do all their good work. So we try to build games which let people play with all the serious stuff of the world. Because in fact, I guess to me the real operative word here, and maybe it's the hammer with which I hit all nails, but the operative word is play, which is in fact what's going on in art and in science and in engineering even, when you're a good engineer, is play. And that's what we really try to activate. So.
And Layla, you live in a collaborative whole.
Yes, that's true. I wanted to say.
WHOLE.
Well, there are lots of parts that we have to sometimes try to put together, but in addition to play, what I was going to say is this open-ended exploration of not only, we have a great Nobel laureate here whose name is Jerry Friedman, an institute professor, and he had to decide when he was young whether to accept a full scholarship to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago or to go to the University of Chicago and work in Fermi's lab, which he did, and he contributed to discovering quarks and won a Nobel for that. But he's one of the greatest supporters of the arts at MIT, so one of the things he always said is it's so important to expose young minds to this, because otherwise they'll only end up solving existing problems. They won't think of problems that don't exist. So it's this kind of spirit of exploration. And I'll just mention two other things, not to take too much time, but I have a lot of examples of visiting artists who've done these interesting things in our labs. We do arranged marriages, I would say, for that. And it ends up being really interesting because they ask each other to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And the scientists in particular, we say, well, why have you opened your lab? Why are you interested in this? And they said, because it reminds us why we went into science. And for once, we don't have to do all these deliverables, and it opens up, all kinds of things, and does contribute to PhD's theses as well. For example, when an artist came in and said he wanted to make a nanoscale wafer-size sculpture of his mother's house, but it had to be pink, and the guy had never done color on the nanoscale, and then he figured it out, and it was in his thesis. One other thing that's kind of interesting that's in the community is the Catalyst Collaborative, which is distinct from the Catalyst Conversations, which is an arts science, a science initiative at the Central Square Theater. And what they do is they try to put on plays that further the public understanding of science, and then they bring in scientists to sort of lead community discussions about those issues. So I think those are two kind of interesting things.
And I'm going to ask the last question, ask you to start, since you said future. What is your vision for where we can go with this?
I think that this is a little bit of a marketing cliche, but it kind of stuck in my mind, maybe because of the T. I heard some marketing person say that the students of the future are going to be like a T. They're going to have this sort of deep skills and embedded knowledge, but be able to reach way out here to other fields. So that's what I see. These students coming, not so many distinctions between, to follow on Scott's point about you're going to be programmed for this career track and that one, but, to have, definite bodies of knowledge and skill set. I'm not suggesting we go away from that, but then be able to apply it in all of these kind of unbounded ways. That's what I see.
Great.
I hope.
Anybody else for the vision?
Go ahead.
Yeah, please.
All right. The earlier panel, I think it was Marlon who said something about, for him, STEAM was about, or for kids who are working in art, maybe they're not going to be artists, but they're going to be positive members of society. And that really resonated with me because I feel like, at least as a museum, we're a place for community. We're, a place for exploring and discovery across all of these disciplines. And so STEAM for me, and I think for the museum, if I may be so bold to speak on behalf of the entire Peabody Essex Museum, is really about this authentic exploration of ourselves and the world around us. And whether it's, working with someone in robotics to explore how we might create something, or working with a sculptor, how can we develop ideas and solve problems that we don't know exist quite yet, but authentically create learners and people who want to contribute and be creative. And creative not being assigned just to the arts, but creative as a skill, as a top-line goal for all of our young people.
Very good.
So I actually have a fairly radical view of this, so you'll forgive me, but right on the other side of one of these walls are people inventing sort of the next generation of 3D printers, which are not what you think of when you think. We're talking about printing fabrics, printing circuits. We're talking about printers that will print other printers. And where all that's going, the good news or the bad news, depending on how you want to look at it, is that much of the work of much of what we call work nowadays, manufacturing, transportation, retail, may all go away. We may actually have a world in which, large amounts of what we need are produced down the end of the block, with designs we uploaded, or maybe even in our own house. And that could either leave us with a world in which very few people have all the goods, or that could leave us with a world in which we all decide that the purpose of our life is not so much about the work we do, but rather the culture we create for each other. And that culture isn't just art, although I love art, but also whether we build cabinets or do the plumbing for our neighbor or build a tree house or design a park, that we're all going to, I think that there's going to be, in the better version of that future, there's going to be need for all of us to be cultural producers. And that to me is really the goal of the work that we're all doing, is to create that generation of producers. So.
I have one up on you. What about self-assembling systems? That's coming.
Right.
So I think we have a fantastic vision of the future and where we want to go. And I just want to bring us back just a little bit to, so what are sort of the next steps? And I think you hit on it, Martha, when you were talking about partnership, which is about we find out who's out there, who's doing what, and how can we connect together to get to that next step of whatever that is that we may not know. We may not all have to be science artists and all the rest of that stuff, but to be able to find out who has. Well, I think your model is fantastic. What's the resource we need and who's got it out there, and how do we get together to do it?
Saeed? A vision?
This is always a very hard question to answer, but it's a. I mean, I think when initially I created Nouveau and I wanted to keep it this small, is that. I wanted to kind of show other schools that you can actually do schools in a very different way, and we have around like 100 schools that go through the space almost every year. And for them, when they come, mostly what I have them do is talk to the students, because that's when they kind of really get to see the impact, that this is how they want their learning to be. And the idea, hopefully, that they can take that back to their schools and try to do more of these things.
Leela, Saeed, Scott, Diane, and Gavin, would you please award them your applause for their wonderful presentation? Terrific.